The sterile white walls of Laboratory 7B hummed with the soft beeping of advanced machinery. Located in the farthest wing of the Xeno Research Station, this particular lab was reserved for what the Galactic Research Consortium euphemistically called specialized psychological and biological studies on emerging species. In reality, it was where they tested the limits of fear responses across the galaxy's sentient beings. Subject secured in the containment chamber, announced the junior technician, her four delicate appendages nervously adjusting the monitoring equipment. Like most Viridian technicians, she was still in her first century of life, practically a child by her species standards. The chief researcher, a tall Taurian with two sets of arms and skin the color of burnished copper, nodded approvingly. His upper set of limbs held a datapad, while the lower pair adjusted the settings on the control panel. Excellent. Begin baseline psychometric reading. Behind a reinforced observation glass, a human male lay strapped to an examination table. Unlike the previous subjects who typically struggled against their restraints or displayed obvious signs of distress, this one appeared remarkably at ease. His posture was relaxed, almost lounging, as though the clinical examination table were a beach chair on a tropical vacation. The Arachnian researcher, whose 8 limbs moved with meticulous precision across multiple holographic interfaces, chittered with mild frustration. "Chief, I'm getting anomalous readings. The subject isn't registering standard fear responses. Have you calibrated for human biology?" asked the chief. 3 times, the spider-like scientist confirmed, her multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "According to our database, humans should display elevated cortisol levels merely from being in an unfamiliar environment. This one's readings suggest he's comfortable." The gelatinous mass in the corner of the room shifted colors from a neutral blue to a concerned purple. As the station's leading psychologist, its ability to change color reflected its thought processes, currently indicating confusion. "Perhaps the specimen is defective," it suggested, its voice emanating from a small translator device. The human suddenly spoke, causing everyone in the observation room to freeze. "Hey folks, I can hear you, you know. These walls aren't as soundproof as you think." His voice was casual, almost cheerful. "And I'm not defective, thank you very much. Just bored. Any chance I could get a magazine or something while you decide what to do with me?" The chief researcher leaned toward the intercom. "How can you understand us?" The human shrugged as much as his restraints allowed. "Your universal translator thingy is working fine. Look, I get that you're trying to be all scary and scientific, but I've worked a night shift at a convenience store in Detroit for 5 years. Trust me, nothing you do is going to top that." The research team exchanged concerned glances. This was unexpected. The chief pulled up the subject's file on his datapad. Subject 7294, H, male human from Earth, designated Class 7 Death World. He read aloud, emphasizing the final classification with appropriate gravity. Previous employment, military service followed by retail work. Captured during routine sampling of Earth's population. The junior technician's skin paled slightly. A Death World inhabitant? Shouldn't we be using enhanced containment protocols? The chief dismissively waved one of his upper arms. Earth is classified as such primarily due to its environmental hazards and the destructive tendencies of its dominant species, not because humans themselves possess extraordinary physical capabilities. Inside the chamber, the human snorted. "Say what you want about Earth, but we call it home. Speaking of which, it's kind of sterile in here. Almost too clean. Makes my nose itch." The gelatinous psychologist rippled with interest. "Fascinating. It appears uncomfortable with sanitized environments. Most species find our sterilization protocols comforting. Let's proceed with the first test," the chief researcher decided. "Prepare formulation G82. The junior technician hesitated. "Sir, that's designed for mid-range fear response in Category 3 sentience. For a Death World species. We start with standard protocols," the chief insisted. "If this one proves resistant, we'll adjust accordingly." As the colorless gas began to seep into the chamber through hidden vents, the research team watched with anticipation. G82 was designed to trigger primal fear responses, a carefully crafted cocktail of chemicals that activated the fear centers in nearly all known sentient brains. The human sniffed twice, then yawned. "Is this supposed to do something?" he asked, seemingly unaffected. "Smells better than the bathroom at my store after the weekend rush." The Arachnian researcher rapidly tapped commands into her console. "No. Elevated heart rate. No cortisol spike. Pupil dilation nominal." "Impossible," the chief muttered. "Increase concentration by 30%. The gas flow intensified, creating a visible haze in the chamber. The human responded by closing his eyes and appearing to relax further. "You know what this reminds me of?" he called out conversationally. "That summer they had that chemical spill by the river. Everyone got 2 weeks off school. Good times." The junior technician's appendages trembled slightly. "Sir, he's falling asleep." Indeed, the human's breathing had slowed, and his posture had become even more relaxed. "Terminate G82 exposure," the chief ordered, frustration evident in his voice. "Prepare formulation R59. The gelatinous psychologist pulsed a warning orange. R59 is classified for use on predator species only. The potential neurological damage is acceptable within experimental parameters, the chief interrupted. This subject is displaying unusual resistance. We need to understand why." As the new gas, this one with a faint greenish tint, filled the chamber, the human stirred from his light doze. "Change of flavor, huh?" He sniffed experimentally. "Ooh, this one's tangy. Reminds me of the industrial district back home. You know, where they make those cheap batteries that always leak." The research team stared in disbelief at their monitoring equipment. Not only was the human not expressing fear, but his brain activity suggested he was experiencing something akin to nostalgic pleasure. "This is unprecedented," the Arachnian researcher whispered, her mandibles clicking rapidly. R59 caused a Kranathian warlord to beg for mercy within seconds of exposure. The human was now humming tunelessly, apparently enjoying himself. "Hey, while we're chatting," he called out, "mind if I ask what exactly you're trying to do here? Because if it's the whole fear and terror thing, you might want to recalibrate your approach." The chief researcher's professional composure was beginning to crack. "Subject 7294. H. These compounds are specifically designed to trigger deep psychological distress. Your lack of response is concerning." The human laughed. "Look, I grew up downwind from 3 chemical plants and a tire recycling facility. My high school was built on what we're pretty sure was an old toxic waste dump. The football field used to glow on hot days. After that, I did 2 tours in active combat zones, then came home to work night shifts in the worst neighborhood in Detroit. Whatever you're pumping in here is like aromatherapy compared to my normal Tuesday." The junior technician looked horrified. "He lived in toxic conditions. Voluntarily?" "Not voluntarily," the human corrected. "Just, because that's where life put me. You adapt." The gelatinous psychologist was now cycling through colors so rapidly it resembled a disco ball. "The psychological implications are staggering. A species that not only survives in toxic environments, but becomes accustomed to them to the point of comfort." The chief researcher had gone very still, all 4 his hands frozen over various controls. "Prepare formulation X27, he said quietly. The laboratory fell silent. "Chief," the Arachnian researcher finally ventured, "X27 is classified ultra-restricted. It's never been tested on Category 7 sentience. The potential for permanent neural damage is noted," the chief interrupted. "But we need answers. This human represents an anomaly that could have significant implications for our understanding of death world adaptations." The junior technician nervously input the authorization codes that would release the laboratory's most potent fear agent from its secure storage. "X27 prepared, sir. Chamber seals doubled. All non-essential personnel should evacuate. Maintain your stations," the chief commanded. "I want full monitoring of this exposure." Inside the chamber, the human had begun to whistle, apparently bored with the proceedings. "Hey, Not to rush you science guys, but how much longer is this going to take? My shift starts at 8, and Jenkins never covers for anyone properly. Initiate X-27 exposure, the chief ordered, ignoring the human's comments. Unlike the previous formulations, X-27 entered the chamber with a subtle shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement on a scorching day. The research team watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and apprehension as the compound reached its target concentration. For the first time, the human reacted visibly. He stopped whistling, his eyebrows drawing together in a slight frown. He inhaled deeply through his nose, held the breath momentarily, then slowly exhaled. The monitoring equipment registered a slight elevation in heart rate, causing the research team to lean forward in anticipation. Then the human smiled. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, sounding genuinely impressed. "This smells exactly like that chemical spill we had back in 2002, the one that turned the creek purple for a month. Man, that takes me back." For precisely 8 seconds, no one in the laboratory moved or spoke. The silence was finally broken by the sound of the junior technician's datapad clattering to the floor from her suddenly limp appendages. "Impossible," the chief researcher whispered. "X-27 causes terror so profound that a draconian general once went catatonic at the mere mention of its chemical composition." The human was now actively sniffing the air, like a connoisseur sampling a fine wine. "You really nailed it with this one. There's that sharp tang up front, then the sort of burning rubber after smell. Classic industrial accident bouquet." He chuckled. "Good memories. That was the summer I met my first girlfriend. We used to hang out by the evacuation center." The gelatinous psychologist had settled into a deep, troubled purple. "Chief, I believe we must consider the possibility that standard fear induction methods may be fundamentally incompatible with human psychology. Or perhaps," the Arachnian researcher suggested, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "we are dealing with a species that has evolved under conditions so consistently threatening that their neurological response to environmental dangers has been recalibrated." The chief researcher stared at the human, who was now reclining as comfortably as his restraints would allow, apparently enjoying the deadly atmosphere in his chamber. "Terminate X-27 exposure," he finally ordered, "and schedule a full biological workup. I want to know everything about this human's physiology down to the molecular level." As the deadly compound was extracted from the chamber, the human called out, "Hey, if you got any more of that last one, mind keeping it running a bit longer? It's kind of nice, remind me of home." The research team exchanged glances that mixed scientific curiosity with something that, in less advanced species, might have been identified as fear. The results from a human's biological workup sent shockwaves through the research station. Emergency meetings were called, and specialists from various disciplines were hastily summoned. "These readings can't be accurate," insisted Dr. Valaxian, the station's chief xenobiologist, her luminescent tentacles agitated as she reviewed the data. "No sentient species could function with these levels of heavy metals and toxins in their system." The chief researcher gestured to the observation screen, where the human was now sitting up on his examination table, cheerfully chatting with the junior technician who had been assigned to monitor him. And yet, he shows no signs of distress or impairment. In fact, all cognitive tests suggest above-average problem-solving abilities for his species baseline. Dr. Valaxian's tentacles curled in distress. The implications are disturbing. If humans have evolved to not merely tolerate, but function normally with such contamination, it suggests their homeworld is far more dangerous than our initial classifications indicated, completed the Arachnian researcher, perhaps even approaching Class 8. The conference room fell silent. Class 8 death worlds were theoretical, planets so inherently hostile to life that the evolution of intelligence was deemed virtually impossible. The gelatinous psychologist, now a thoughtful shade of indigo, rippled gently. "We must consider the behavioral adaptations as well. This human does not merely tolerate toxic environments. He expresses nostalgia for them. From a psychological perspective, this suggests a species-wide normalization of conditions that would be considered traumatic by any reasonable standard. We need to reassess our approach, the chief researcher decided. This human cannot be studied as a mere test subject. We need to engage with him more directly, understand his perspective. Are you suggesting we treat him as a research collaborator? Dr. Valaxian asked incredulously. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that our current paradigm is insufficient, the chief replied. This human represents something our models failed to predict, a sentient being that has evolved under conditions we previously considered incompatible with higher cognitive development. And so, 3 standard cycles later, the human found himself moved from the examination room to what the station classified as diplomatic quarters, a comfortable suite designed for visiting dignitaries and research partners. Nice upgrade, he commented, surveying the spacious accommodation with appreciation. Though it's almost too clean in here. Gives me the creeps. The junior technician, who had been assigned as his liaison, tilted her head curiously. Would you prefer we introduce particulate matter or chemical compounds into the environmental system? The human laughed. I'm kidding. Mostly. But you guys really do overthink the whole sterility thing. A little. Dirt never hurt anyone. Multiple studies across 17 sentient species would disagree with that assessment, she noted primly. Yeah, well, humans are different, I guess. He flopped down onto the seating arrangement, which automatically adjusted to his body shape. So what's the deal? I'm not strapped to a table anymore, which I appreciate, but I'm guessing you folks still want something from me. The junior technician's appendages fidgeted slightly. The Research Council is interested in understanding human adaptability. Your response to our standard testing protocols was unprecedented. You mean those gases that were supposed to scare me? The human grinned. Look, I get that you're all advanced aliens with fancy tech and clean environments, but you've got to understand something about Earth. We've been polluting our planet since the Industrial Revolution. Kids like me who grew up in places like Detroit were practically evolved to breathe that stuff. But the compounds we exposed you to weren't merely pollutants, the technician explained, seeming genuinely confused. They were specifically designed to trigger neurological fear responses. The human shrugged. Fear's relative, isn't it? When I was deployed, we had this saying, it's only scary the first time you almost die. After that, your baseline changes. This conversation, recorded and analyzed by the research team, sparked an entirely new direction of study. Instead of subjecting the human to further physical tests, they began a comprehensive series of interviews, seeking to understand Earth and its inhabitants from the human's perspective. So let me get this straight, the Arachnian researcher said during one such session, her mandibles clicking in what the human had come to recognize as disbelief. Your species knowingly continued industrial practices that contaminated your own habitat. Pretty much, the human confirmed. I mean, there were always people who complained and tried to change things, but money talks, you know? And cleaning things up properly costs a lot of money. But the researcher struggled to find the appropriate term. Suicidal. The human laughed. Nah, just short-sighted. Though I guess when you add it all up over centuries, maybe it does look kind of suicidal from an outside perspective. These insights proved both fascinating and alarming to the Galactic Research Consortium. Special committees were formed, reports were filed, and eventually a high-level meeting was convened to discuss the human question. The High Administrator's Chamber was designed to impress. With its soaring crystalline dome and the circular arrangement of 17 elevated platforms, each occupied by a representative of the consortium's founding species. The human, standing on the central platform, looked remarkably unfazed by the grand surroundings. So, he said, breaking the formal silence that had fallen over the assembly, is this the part where you decide whether to dissect me or not? Because I gotta say, I've got bills to pay back home. The High Administrator, a being of pure energy contained within an ornate metallic frame, flickered with what might have been amusement or annoyance. It was difficult to tell with non-corporeal entities. Human, the Administrator's voice resonated through the chamber. Your presence here has raised questions of considerable galactic importance. Your species' ability to not merely survive, but become accustomed to conditions most sentients would find lethal is unprecedented. Yeah, we're pretty good at adapting, the human agreed casually. Necessity and all that. Indeed, the administrator's energy field pulsed thoughtfully. The question before this council is how to proceed. Some among us believe that humans represent a potential threat, a species so resilient that, given access to advanced technology, they might become unstoppable. That sounds cool, but honestly, most of us just want decent health care and maybe a long weekend now, and then, the human replied. Others, the administrator continued, ignoring the interruption, see potential in your species' unique capabilities. There are environments in this galaxy too hostile for even our most advanced equipment. Places where your natural adaptations might prove valuable. The human raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job? A ripple of what could only be described as uncomfortable laughter moved through the assembly. We are proposing, the administrator clarified, a limited partnership. Humans would be granted access to certain technologies and knowledge in exchange for their assistance in exploring and potentially remediating toxic environments that are currently inaccessible to other species. Hazard pay included, I hope, the human remarked. The compensation would be appropriate to the risk. One of the council members interjected, their translator giving their voice a metallic quality. The human pretended to consider the offer, though his mind was already made up. The prospect of space travel and alien technology was too enticing to refuse, even if it meant being the galaxy's toxic waste janitor. All right, he finally said, I'm in, but I'm just one guy. If you want a real workforce, you'll need to talk to our governments, set up proper diplomatic channels. Those arrangements are already in progress, the administrator revealed. Your retrieval was not, shall we say, entirely random. We've been observing Earth for some time. Huh, the human said, genuinely surprised for perhaps the first time since his arrival. So, I'm like a test case? Precisely. And your responses have been most illuminating. The meeting concluded with formal declarations and the signing of preliminary agreements. The human found it amusing that bureaucracy seemed to be a universal constant, regardless of how advanced a civilization became. As he was escorted from the chamber, now with the status of diplomatic representative rather than research subject, he turned to the junior technician who had become his primary liaison. So, he said with a grin, now that I'm officially not a lab rat anymore, any chance I could get a tour of this place? I've only seen the inside of a lab and my fancy new quarters. The technician's appendages fluttered in what he had come to recognize as her version of a smile. I believe that can be arranged. The station has several recreational areas that might interest you. As they walked through the station's gleaming corridors, the human inhaled deeply, taking in the meticulously filtered air. You know what's weird? He commented. I'm actually starting to miss the smell of gasoline and fast food that used to hit me when I stepped outside my apartment. This place is so sterile. The technician regarded him curiously. You prefer polluted air? Not prefer, exactly, he clarified. It's just familiar, you know? It smells like home. She didn't know, of course. Her species had evolved on a world of pristine forests and crystal clear waters, where the very concept of pollution was foreign until they developed space travel and encountered other civilizations. If it would make you more comfortable, she offered hesitantly, we could synthesize some Earth-like atmospheric compounds for your quarters. The human laughed. Nah, I'll adjust. That's what humans do best, right? Besides, might be good for my lungs to get a break from all that Detroit special. As they continued their tour, they passed other researchers and station personnel, many of whom stared openly at the human. Word had spread quickly about the Death World inhabitant who had inhaled X-27 and described it as nostalgic. They're afraid of me, the human observed, noticing the way some of the station's inhabitants gave him a wide berth. Not afraid, precisely, the technician corrected diplomatically. Cautious. Your species represents something outside their experience. A creature that breathes poison and calls it air, the human mused. I guess that would be pretty freaky from their perspective. Later that evening, as the human settled into his new role in quarters. The research team convened for one final review. The implications for xenobiology are profound, Dr. Valaxian was saying, her tentacles animatedly illustrating her points with glowing patterns. If humans have developed such remarkable adaptations in a mere few thousand years of industrialization, what might they become given proper guidance and technological assistance? Or what might they become without proper oversight? The chief researcher cautioned. We must remember that these adaptations developed in response to their own destructive tendencies. They poisoned their world and then evolved to tolerate the poison. The gelatinous psychologist, now a contemplative green, offered its perspective. Perhaps that is precisely why they are valuable. Who better to help remediate toxic environments than those who created and survived them in the first place? A fair point, the Arachnian researcher acknowledged. And there's something almost admirable about their resilience. Other species would have perished or abandoned their home world under similar conditions, or prevented those conditions from developing in the first place, the chief researcher added dryly. The discussion continued late into the station's night cycle, a microcosm of the broader debate occurring across the consortium's governing bodies. Humanity represented both an opportunity and a challenge, a species so adaptable that they had turned their planetary misfortune into an evolutionary advantage. Meanwhile, in his new quarters, the human slept soundly for the first time since his arrival. He dreamed of Earth, its bustling cities, its polluted skies, its chaotic beauty. And in the morning, when he awoke to the pristine environment of the research station, he felt a strange pang of homesickness for the very toxins he had spent a lifetime breathing. When the junior technician arrived to escort him to his first official briefing as a consultant, she found him standing by the environmental controls, attempting to adjust the settings. "Is something wrong with your quarters?" she inquired. "Just too perfect," he replied with a sheepish smile. "I'm trying to make it feel a bit more like home." "And how would one accomplish that?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Well, on Earth, I'd crack a window," he explained. "Let in some of that city air, you know? The mix of exhaust fumes, restaurant grease, maybe a hint of the river when the wind's right." The technician's appendages twitched with what might have been disgust or fascination. "You miss pollution. We're right." He laughed. "But yeah, I guess I do. It's too quiet in here, too clean. Makes me feel like I'm in a hospital." As they walked to the briefing room, the technician made notes on her datapad. This information would be valuable for the upcoming human integration protocols. If the partnership with Earth was to succeed, accommodations would need to be made, not just for humans' physical requirements, but for their psychological comfort as well. The briefing itself was straightforward. The human smile. "You're wondering why we stayed on Earth when it became so polluted, instead of finding somewhere better." Her tentacles flickered in what he'd come to recognize as surprise. "Actually, yes. Many species abandon environments that become toxic, seeking new territories. Even those with strong attachment to ancestral lands typically relocate when conditions become hazardous." The human turned back to the viewport, considering his answer. "I think maybe that's the thing about humans that's hardest for other species to understand. We're incredibly adaptable, but we're also stubborn. When faced with a problem, our first instinct isn't usually to leave. It's to figure out how to live with it, around it, or through it, even when doing so causes harm to yourselves." Dr. Valaxian asked softly. "Especially then," the human replied. "We got this weird pride thing about suffering, like it's somehow noble to endure rather than escape." "Fascinating," she murmured. "And yet, paradoxically, your species has also developed remarkable technologies specifically designed to mitigate suffering." "Yeah, we're a mass of contradictions," the human admitted. "We create pollution, then build filters. We destroy ecosystems, then establish preservation areas. We wage war, then develop elaborate rules for how war should be conducted humanely." He laughed at the absurdity of it all. "I guess we're just really good at creating our own problems, then patting ourselves on the back when we partially solve them." Their conversation was interrupted by a message on the human's datapad. Final preparations for the upcoming mission were ready for his review. "Duty calls," he said, nodding respectfully to the xenobiologist. Thanks for the chat, doctor. Before you go, she said hesitantly, may I ask one more question? A personal one. Shoot, now that you've experienced environments free from the pollutants you grew up with, do you not prefer them? Even slightly, the human considered this carefully. Honestly, they're nice to visit. Clean air, clean water, it's all great in theory. But there's something missing. Character, maybe? History? I can't quite put my finger on it. He shrugged. Maybe it's just familiarity. The smells and sounds I grew up with might be objectively worse, but they're mine, you know. As he walked away, Dr. Valaxian's tentacles pulsed with thoughtful colors. The human had articulated something profound about sentient psychology, the power of the familiar, even when the familiar was harmful. It was a perspective that might prove valuable as the consortium expanded its understanding of habitability and species adaptation. In the days that followed, the human's integration into the research station continued. He underwent training for his upcoming mission, learning to use specialized equipment and familiarizing himself with safety protocols that, to his amusement, were far more comprehensive than anything he'd encountered on Earth. You guys really planned for every contingency, huh? He commented during one particularly detailed briefing about emergency procedures. Of course, replied the mission coordinator, a being composed of interlocking crystal structures that shifted and realigned as it spoke. Uncertainty is to be minimized whenever possible. The human laughed. On Earth, we have this saying, no plant survives contact with the enemy. This is not a combat mission, the coordinator pointed out, its crystals flickering with confusion. Figure of speech, the human explained, just means things rarely go exactly as planned. So, sometimes you have to improvise. Improvisation introduces variables, the coordinator stated, clearly troubled by the concept. Variables increase risk. They also increase opportunity, the human countered. Some of humanity's greatest discoveries came from things not going according to plan. This philosophy, so foreign to many of the methodical, precision-oriented species in the consortium, became something of a hallmark of the human's contributions. While he followed protocols and training diligently, he also brought a flexibility of thought that occasionally unsettled but often impressed his alien colleagues. On the evening before the mission launch, the human found himself invited to a small gathering, what on Earth might have been called a good luck dinner. Various members of the research team and mission crew assembled in one of the station's communal dining areas, sharing food appropriate to their diverse biologies. To successful exploration, toasted the chief researcher, raising a container of what looked like glowing blue liquid. And to not dying horribly on a toxic moon, the human added with a grin, lifting his own drink, a synthesized approximation of Earth beer that wasn't quite right, but close enough. There was a moment of awkward silence before the junior technician, who had become something of a cultural interpreter, explained. Humans often use humor to address potentially dangerous situations. It's a psychological coping mechanism. Ah, said the chief, his forearms performing a complex gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. Then yes, to not dying horribly. The gathering grew more relaxed as the evening progressed. The humans shared stories of Earth, carefully selected to be amusing rather than alarming, while the alien researchers asked questions and offer comparisons to their own worlds and experiences. So there I was, the human recounted, deep into a tale from his convenience store days. 3 a.m, and this guy walks in wearing nothing but a barrel with suspenders, covered in green paint, insisting he's a pickle and demanding cigarettes. Hey, pickle, the Arachnian researcher inquired. It's a preserved vegetable, the human explained. The point is, he was clearly on something, drugs, you know, and getting belligerent. This sounds dangerous, the junior technician commented, her appendages twitching with concern. Yeah, Tuesday night in Detroit, the human said with a dismissive wave. Anyway, I've dealt with worse. Told him we don't sell to produce, store policy. He actually found that funny enough that he left peacefully. He chuckled at the memory. The thing about working nights in a bad neighborhood, you develop a sense for when to joke and when to hit the panic button. Your species uses humor as a defense mechanism even in potentially dangerous situations. Observe the gelatinous psychologist, its color shifting to a curious yellow-green. You could say that the human agreed. Sometimes humor is the only thing that gets you through. That and perspective. Perspective? Prompted the chief researcher. Yeah, like when you've seen a guy try to rob you with a stapler he's convinced is a gun because he's so high. Alien research labs seem pretty tame by comparison. The gathering erupted in sounds that the human's translator rendered as laughter, though the actual noises range from chittering to melodic humming to crystalline tinkling. As the evening wound down and the mission team began to disperse to their quarters for pre-launch rest, the human found himself walking alongside the chief researcher down one of the station's curved corridors. "I've been meaning to ask," the human said. "Why me? Out of all the humans you could have grabbed for your tests, why pick a convenience store clerk from Detroit?" The chief's upper arms made a graceful gesture while his lower ones remained clasped behind his back. Selection was not random. Our preliminary scans indicated you had exceptional tolerance levels, even by human standards. Your blood work showed exposure to a broader spectrum of environmental toxins than 98% of your species. Huh, the human mused. So being poor and living the wrong zip code finally paid off. "I'm not familiar with this concept of zip code," the chief admitted. "Just another way we humans divide ourselves up," the human explained. "Some places get clean air and water, other places get factory runoff and smog." The chief was silent for a moment. "Yet you speak of your home with affection, despite these conditions." "It's complicated," the human said with a shrug. "Detroit's got problems, sure, but it's also got good people, real community. We look out for each other because nobody else will. That counts for something." "Indeed," the chief agreed, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps this is another human adaptation worth studying, the ability to form social bonds under adverse conditions." The human laughed. "You guys really turn everything into science, don't you?" "It is our nature," the chief acknowledged, with what might have been a smile. The following morning, as the station's lighting simulated dawn, the human prepared for the mission. He donned the specialized environmental suit, a marvel of alien technology that was simultaneously more advanced and more comfortable than anything he'd worn on Earth. "This suit," explained the technician assisting him, "will provide additional protection against any unexpected environmental hazards. While your natural resistances are remarkable, our data on human physiological limits remains incomplete. So, it's a just-in-case thing," the human summarized. "Fair enough." "Precisely," the technician confirmed. "The mission parameters call for graduated exposure. You will begin fully protected, then selectively deactivate barriers to directly experience the environment, but only after initial safety assessments are complete." The human nodded, appreciating the caution while also finding it somewhat amusing. He'd worked construction jobs with fewer safety measures while handling known carcinogens. The transport vessel was small but elegant, designed for short-range planetary exploration. As the human boarded alongside the specialized research team, he noticed that their environmental suits were significantly bulkier than his own. "You guys really don't mess around with protection, huh?" he commented. "The atmosphere of GX 435's moon contains compounds that would dissolve most organic tissues on contact," explained the mission scientist, a being whose transparent exoskeleton revealed complex internal structures pulsing with bioluminescent fluid. "Your suit is lighter because your biology can tolerate greater exposure than ours." "Well, that's reassuring," the human replied, unsure whether to be proud or concerned about this distinction. The journey to the moon was brief, the transport vessel moving with a smoothness that belied its speed. As they descended through the moon's thin atmosphere, the human peered through the viewport at the landscape below, a terrain of jagged rock formations under a hazy, yellowish sky. "Looks a bit like Arizona after a dust storm," he commented. "Just, more alien." Surface readings indicate ambient toxicity levels at 17% above our preliminary estimates, announced the pilot, a being whose multiple eyes each focused on different instrument panels simultaneously. The mission scientist turned to the human. "Does this concern you?" The human shrugged inside his suit. If your estimates were accurate about me surviving the original levels, 17% more shouldn't be a deal breaker, right? There was a pause as the alien team processed this remarkably casual approach to potentially lethal conditions. Your confidence is notable, the scientist finally said. The transport touched down on a relatively flat area amidst the rocky terrain. After a final systems check, the team prepared to disembark and begin their survey. Remember, the mission leader instructed, this is a graduated exposure protocol. All team members maintain full environmental seals until baseline readings are established. The human nodded along with the others, though privately he was already curious about what this alien atmosphere might smell like. After the fear gas experiments, he developed a strange fascination with his own unusual tolerances. As they exited the transport vessel, the gravity, slightly lower than Earth's standard, gave his movements a buoyancy that took some adjustment. The landscape, seen directly rather than through a viewport, was even more surreal. Rock formations twisted into shapes that seemed to defy natural processes, their surfaces glistening with an oily sheen under the distant sun. Preliminary readings are consistent with probe data, reported one of the team members, waving a scanner over the nearest formation. Heavy metal content in the substrate exceeds safety thresholds by a factor of 23. Atmospheric analysis confirms presence of chlorine compounds, sulfur derivatives, and several unidentified volatile organics, added another. The human listened to their exchanges with interest, noting how the team maintained precise, almost clinical descriptions of what was, essentially, a hellscape by most civilized standards. After establishing their portable research station, a dome-like structure that inflated from a remarkably compact package, the team began more detailed analysis of the immediate surroundings. We are now proceeding to Phase 2, announced the mission leader. Human specialist, please prepare for limited environmental exposure. The human moved to the designated area where his suit's settings could be safely adjusted. A technician carefully modified the filtration systems, allowing a small percentage of the moon's atmosphere to mix with his suit's internal air supply. Initial exposure set to 5%, the technician informed him. Please report any adverse reactions immediately. The human took a deep breath as the adjusted mixture reached his lungs, tingling in the back of my throat. Nothing serious, kind of like when you stand downwind from a refinery. The incremental exposure continued, with the human providing detailed feedback at each stage. By the time they reached 30% external atmosphere, some of the alien researchers were showing signs of distress simply watching the process. I must register my concern. The mission doctor finally interjected. While the human shows remarkable tolerance, we have insufficient data on long-term effects of these compounds on his species. I appreciate the concern, the human said, but this isn't that different from a bad air quality day back home. I probably breathed worse during wildfire season. This statement, intended to be reassuring, only seemed to increase the doctor's agitation. Your planet experiences regular atmospheric combustion events severe enough to create comparable conditions, the doctor asked incredulously. Well, they've gotten worse in recent decades, the human explained, but yeah, forest fires are a thing. Cities sometimes issue warnings to stay indoors, but plenty of people still go about their business. The mission leader's appendages made a gesture that the human had come to recognize as the equivalent of shaking one's head in disbelief. We will proceed with caution, they finally decided. Maximum exposure level for today's testing will be capped at 50%. The human was slightly disappointed by this conservative approach, but understood their caution. Even in the name of science, watching someone willingly breathe toxic fumes was probably unsettling if your species hadn't evolved in an industrial hellscape. The day's research proceeded methodically, with the human's limited exposure providing valuable data that the more sensitive instruments couldn't capture. His descriptions of subtle changes in the atmosphere's composition as they moved between different areas of the moon's surface proved particularly useful in mapping contamination patterns. It's stronger here, he reported as they approached a depression in the terrain where a dark, viscous substance had pooled. Definitely more of that metallic quality with something else, almost sweet, but in a chemical way, like antifreeze. The mission scientists' recording appendage moved rapidly across their data interface. Fascinating. Our instruments detect elevated levels of arsenate compounds in this area, but the sweet characteristic you describe suggests the presence of ethylene glycol derivatives, which we hadn't anticipated. By the end of the expedition's first day, the human had provided insights that would have taken the automated systems weeks to compile. His ability to make intuitive connections between sensory experiences and chemical compositions, honed through a lifetime of exposure to industrial pollution, proved to be an unexpected asset. As the team returned to the transport vessel and prepared for their journey back to the research station, the mission leader approached the human. "Your contributions today have been invaluable," they said formally. "The consortium will be re-evaluating our assessment of human capabilities in light of your performance." "Happy to help," the human replied with a slight smile. "Though I have to say, as toxic wastelands go, this moon is pretty tame compared to some places I've been." "That observation is both fascinating and concerning," the mission leader noted. "Perhaps on our next expedition, you might share more about these places you've experienced on Earth." The human smile widened. "Sure thing. Though fair warning, some of the stories might give your risk assessment team nightmares." Upon their return to the research station, news of the mission's success spread quickly. The human found himself something of a celebrity, with researchers from various disciplines seeking him out to discuss his experiences and insights. In the days that followed, as the data from the expedition was analyzed and reports were prepared for the consortium's central archives, the human status continued to evolve. What had begun as a simple research subject had become a valuable consultant and was now verging on something approaching diplomatic representation. "The High Administrator has requested your presence," the chief researcher informed him one morning, all four of his arms conveying a sense of importance through their precise positioning. "It seems your insights have attracted attention at the highest levels." "Sounds serious," the human commented. "Should I be worried?" "Not at all," the chief assured him. "In fact, I believe they wish to discuss expanding our partnership with Earth." The meeting with the High Administrator took place in a chamber even more impressive than the one where the initial agreement had been formalized. This time, the human wasn't standing alone on a platform, but was seated at a table alongside senior researchers and consortium officials. "Your capabilities have exceeded our projections," the administrator began, their energy form pulsing with what the human had come to recognize as enthusiasm. "The data you've provided from just one expedition has advanced our understanding of toxic environment adaptation significantly." "Glad I could help," the human replied. "Though I'm still not sure why this is such a big deal to you folks. From my perspective, I just described what I was smelling." "That modesty is noted," the administrator said. "But what you consider mundane is revolutionary from our perspective. Your species' ability to not merely survive, but function analytically in environments we consider deadly represents a paradigm shift in our understanding of adaptability." The conversation that followed outlined a vision for a more comprehensive partnership, one that would involve not just individual humans, but formalized exchange programs, joint research initiatives, and eventually, perhaps, full Earth participation in the Galactic Research Consortium. "We would, of course, offer technological assistance in addressing some of your planet's more pressing environmental challenges," one of the officials added. The human raised an eyebrow. "In exchange for us helping you clean up your toxic messes." "A mutually beneficial arrangement," the official confirmed, either missing or ignoring the slight edge in the human's tone. "Your species has developed unique adaptations that make you invaluable for certain high-risk operations. We possess technologies that could help mitigate the very conditions that necessitated those adaptations." "Sounds fair enough," the human acknowledged after a moment's consideration. "Though I should warn you, Earth politics can be messier than any toxic waste dump. Getting everyone to agree on this kind of partnership won't be simple." "We anticipate challenges," the administrator conceded, their energy form shifting to a more serious hue. "But we believe the potential benefits outweigh the diplomatic complexities." As the meeting concluded and formal protocols were initiated for expanded contact with Earth's governments, the human found himself in the strange position of having unintentionally become humanity's first real ambassador to an interstellar organization. So, not bad for a convenience store clerk from Detroit, huh? He remarked to the junior technician as they walked back to his quarters. Your transition from research subject to diplomatic representative has been most unexpected, she agreed, her appendages moving in what he now recognized as her version of amusement. Perhaps there is something to your human concept of improvisation after all. The human laughed. Life's funny that way. One day you're breathing in factory fumes and dealing with drunk customers. The next you're helping aliens map toxic moons and negotiating interspecies agreements. Do you miss it? She asked unexpectedly. Your former life? The human considered the question seriously. Parts of it, yeah. Friends, familiar places, even some of the chaos. But this, he gestured broadly, encompassing the station and, by extension, the vastness of space beyond it. This is pretty amazing, too. And the air? She inquired, her tone betraying genuine curiosity. Do you still miss the pollutants? The human grinned. You know what's really weird? Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I catch myself thinking about the smell of the bus exhaust outside my apartment window. Not because it was good, but because it meant I was home. As they reached his quarters, he paused at the door. I think that's what you guys find hardest to understand about humans. We can adapt to almost anything, even things that are objectively terrible, and somehow find comfort in the familiarity of it. The technician's appendages moved in a gesture he couldn't quite interpret. That is both your species' greatest strength and, perhaps, your most significant vulnerability. Yeah, the human agreed with a thoughtful nod. You might be right about that. Later that evening, as he stood by the viewport in his quarters looking out at the endless expanse of stars, the human reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From breathing the industrial air of Detroit to helping map toxic environments across the galaxy, all because his body had adapted to conditions that other species found unimaginable. A message notification flashed on his datapad. The preliminary schedule for his return to Earth, where he would assist with the initial diplomatic contacts between the consortium and human governments. He would be going home, but not as the same person who had left. He was now a bridge between worlds, his very physiology a testament to humanity's remarkable, if sometimes troubling, adaptability. Before turning in for the night, he made one final adjustment to his quarters' environmental settings, a small tweak he discovered he could make without triggering the station's safety protocols. The air recycling system hummed slightly differently, introducing trace elements that, while well within safety parameters for all species, created a subtle but distinct scent. He took a deep breath, smiling slightly as the faint metallic tang reached his nostrils. It wasn't quite Detroit, but it was close enough to help him sleep. After all, fear gas or not, there was something to be said for the smell of home.